Yeah, what's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Prison Break Raw. I'm your host, the one and only Big JD. Go ahead, get this channel, subscribe, share, leave some messages or comments, hit that thumbs up for the like, notification bell to be informed on all episodes when they drop. Most importantly, if you enjoy this content, please feel free to share it. Sharing is caring. Share it to your family, your friends, your coworkers, anywhere and everywhere in your social media platforms. Let's get this raw and uncut material out there to the millions that don't know we are here. In case you hear a bunch of noise in the background, howling, meowing, and you see the curtains moving around back and forth, don't fear. It's just my cat doing her job. She basically found out that there is a rodent in the house that has bad paperwork, and now she's in the back boo-bopping his ass. A little mouse that she found, a rat, rodent, trying to survive, stuck its face out, exposed itself, and now that cat is basically tormenting it behind me right now as we speak. So pay it no mind, pay it no attention. That's what we do. We put our blinders up. We mind our own business, right? And all the things that we are involved in. So let's talk about this one right here that is an interesting story of survival, of strength, of basically going the lone wolf, but going the lone wolf as a group. And a lot of people don't really know the full history of this. You hear bits and pieces of it all around. But I actually got it from a righteous OG that was a part of this organization. And who knows where he is today? I have no idea. I haven't talked to him in well over 20 years. But the Fresno Bulldogs, what were they about? Were they righteous norteños? Were they their own thing? Did they just have kind of like an understanding with the norteños, but basically because of a mutual cause and a mutual struggle, they basically were rocking the letter 4 or the number 14, the letter N, and what did it mean for them? Because technically Fresno is not really up north. It's Central California, Central Valley, Central whatnot, but there are a lot of neighborhoods that are all throughout that county and around it that are norteños, but there's a lot of sureño neighborhoods that are up there as well. But these Bulldogs, what was their story? What was their deal? Well, gangs in Fresno started to pop up around the 1960s. Weren't really so much called Bulldog gangs. Bulldog is something that came to be like a loose-knit organization of gangs from the Fresno County, Fresno area, specifically the city of Fresno on the east side, that banded together and formed like their own, in a sort of sense, a disruptive group. And they ran pretty much with the North, but they were a part of the struggle that was happening in the 80s, you know, the struggle for power and all these things that were going on. And they became known as the Fresno Bulldogs, and then it kind of like moved out into the streets, and then a lot of these different gangs, but which were, you know, different names of neighborhoods that were out there in Fresno. I'm not going to throw the different names out there because it's irrelevant, but Bulldog was kind of like the same thing as what Norteño or what Sureño would be. Bulldog was the banner that they fell under, but they all had their own little gangs. But the unique thing about them is that there was no centralized power. Or there is no centralized power. They're pretty much just individuals, but they have a mutual understanding of backing each other up to the fullest when it needs to happen. And I don't care what anybody says about the Bulldogs today or yesterday. I actually have experience with them on several different levels. And I remember once upon a time when they were still clicked up with the North. You would see various different older gente that had an F-14 tattooed on them for Fresno 14, whatnot. And that was their thing. And a lot of them covered the tattoo up. Some of them didn't. Some of them held on to it. Some of them finally switched it around, and they turned the 1 into a 2. Because what's the second letter in the alphabet? B. What's the fourth letter in the alphabet? D. 2-4 meant Bulldogs. So that was a pretty crafty and nifty way to cover up what they used to once upon a time be. But I got to tell you, man, they put in a lot of work. They put in a lot of work. They had a lot of numbers. And they even had a couple of their own that had became somebody up in, you know what we're talking about, in a certain organization that's up there. But for the most part, a lot of them felt like they weren't being totally recognized. They didn't feel like that they were completely appreciated to the fullest because they were frontliners in a lot of ways. And people don't realize this. People don't know the history of this. But a lot of them cats were frontliners, and a lot of them were quick to kill, smash, and handle business at the drop of a hat. They were like that, man. Then later on, when I went back into the CDCR, the California Department of Corruptions and Rehumiliation, it was in 96, and these Bulldogs over at Wasco were actually running with us now at this point. No, they didn't start wearing blue. No, they didn't start putting like 13s on them and stuff like that. It was just a mutual understanding and a mutual alliance. They still pretty much did their own thing in a lot of ways. But they were clicked up with the homies in a lot of different ways. Even some homies had them for cellies. I had a Bulldog for a cellie, as a matter of fact. And I learned a great deal about them. He was from Eastside Fresno. I don't know exactly what clique he's from, where he was from out there. But he was from Eastside Fresno, and he told me a lot about this history, what happened, because a lot of people say, well, you used to be norteños, and he would assert the fact that they were never actually norteños per se. They just ran with them much the same way that they were now running with us. So I was just like, okay. I mean, I took him for his word. Whether that's true or not, over the years, I've heard different stories. But for the most part, I have always heard that Bulldogs were always like their own thing. They were their own fort in a lot of ways. So going to Centinela is when I had this Bulldog for a cellie. When I was over there in the orientation building on B Yard, I had this Bulldog for a cellie. And when you're in orientation waiting to go to committee, the classification committee, all you do is sit in the cell. You don't go to yard, anything like that. So I sat in there with this guy, and I learned a great deal about like the Bulldogs and how they, became what they are, and how they moved away from that, what they stand for now, and what they're down with now. And I got to tell you, anytime the shit popped, I mean, they were right there in the front every time. So you can't really take much away from them. A lot of people talk shit about them. A lot of people, say that they bang on the doors and they bark through the doors and they're cell soldiers in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of young dudes, and the fact that they don't really have like a set of rules, structure to fall under, they're basically just free to do whatever they want. So yeah, they do a lot of that trying to get into your head. And they do get into a lot of homies' heads, because I've been later on when the Bulldogs were completely all on their own at this point, later on in the early 2000s, then when I'm sitting in Wasco again, they would be beating on the doors. They'd be getting into homies' heads, and they'd get into your head. A lot of homies allowed them to get into their heads in a lot of different ways. And, I've always been ridiculed all the way through until maybe I got older, and after I've been around a little while, it started to just die out a little bit. But I've always had that white boy thing, white boy this, white boy that. I've always been the underdog. I've always been the one that people doubted. I've always been the one that was looked upon differently, and I always had to go the extra mile in a lot of different ways. But the one thing that I never did is I never peed and ran away from any situation, no matter what it was. There would be times where there would be places where homies would question if I was even with the business, if I was real. What's up with this cat? Who is this cat? This and this and this and that. So I kind of always felt a sense of empathy with the Bulldogs, because it was the same thing for them. Wherever they went, homies would badmouth them, talk shit about them, call them weak, call them this, call them that. Oh, they ain't going to make it. Let's use them. Let's run them. Let's smash them. Let's do this. Let's do that. So I always felt like a sense of empathy towards these Bulldogs because of that, because I went through a lot of the same shit. No matter where it was, at the end of the day, nobody could look past this. Even in this day and age, any time that I try to speak on something, nobody can look past this, the optics. You see what I'm saying? But here I am, still going strong, still alive, still pushing hard. So what does that say? It says a lot about your heart. It says a lot about your character. And the same thing with them dudes. Because they're still pushing it down. They're still holding it down. They're still there. They're still doing what they do. Whenever they're in a spot, they disrupt a lot of things. They disrupt a lot of peace treaties or a lot of integrated yards and all that stuff like that. If there's a situation where the doors pop and your door's open and one of them's open, they're going to run out there and they're going to handle their business. They're not going to run. They're not going to shut the door. In Wasco, this used to happen all the time. Anytime we cross paths with them, it was on. There could be 2 of them and 6 of us, and they're still going to get busy. I've always noticed that about them. Not only are they called Bulldogs, but in a lot of ways you can call them underdogs. And I know a little something about that. You know what I'm saying? I know a lot about being the underdog, a great deal about it. Been through it my whole entire time and still came out unscathed, still came out with a good name. And a lot of them dudes got good names. A lot of them dudes are with the business. They're just from a whole different philosophy. You know, they embrace a whole different ideology. They move differently. But you can't take their gangster away from them because a lot of them will handle their business. So, that was what it was. They kind of like just went through an evolution, you know, because they always pretty much maintained their own independence in a lot of ways. Even when they were a part of what was going on north, to the point to when they became a part of what the homies were. Now, here's where the homies kind of made, in a way, the same mistakes as the ones in the north made. They put a lot of like unrealistic expectations or tried to lock down control over these Bulldogs. You know, like you running with us, you doing all this with us, you have to be this, you have to do that. Well, Bulldogs statewide decided that they're not going to do that for anybody at this point. So one day, they decided to take flight on everybody statewide. And they coordinated this shit, and they did it. It happened in Corcoran. It happened in a few other spots. There'd be some spots where there'd be like maybe 1 or 2 Bulldogs, and they just take flight on the whole yard. And all these things happened. I mean, shit. I heard stories about what happened in Corcoran. Excuse me, a little bit of heartburn from breakfast. About the time when they basically caught a lot of people slipping, and they were in there stabbing people and doing all kinds of shit. They put the work in, and they ended up going to places like Salinas Valley and Pleasant Valley, and those became the designated spots for Bulldogs. Pleasant Valley, Salinas Valley. I think, you know, some of them were even being put in a yard in Chuckawalla in the level 2. And yeah, man, they were doing their thing. And if you just so happen to end up touching down by accident on the yard over there at Pleasant Valley where they were at, or you just so happen to get one of them that showed up on the 180 yard at Salinas Valley by accident, it was on and cracking. That fool knew he had to take flight the minute he got there, or else it was his ass. And that's how it was. And then later on, like I said, in the 2000s, like we're talking, you know, 2004 and later and stuff like that, they were already well in their own zone, their own lane. And that's when they'd be barking on the doors and just basically driving a lot of the homies crazy. Did you take care of that rat? Did you take care of that mouse? All right. Did her job, handled her business, went on the mission, got rid of the rodent. Well, here she is. But yes, that's pretty much my experience with the Bulldogs. That's what I know about the Bulldogs. Whatever the Bulldogs are doing these days, I have no idea. Don't really care because I'm not in the system anymore. But yeah, you know, I've seen them go through this evolutionary stage. I seen them when they still had the Mongolian locks, you know, and the kind of like the bowl haircuts and a lot of the kind of hairdos that they would have up north. And if the ones didn't grow their hair out and slick it back, most of them were just shaving their heads all the way around. And you couldn't really tell them the difference between them and homies in a lot of ways in that regard. But the one thing that they lost was that Mongolian lock that a lot of them used to have that was a shared trait that people up north used to have, like back in the days. I don't really know if they still have that same practice. But yeah, you knew one just by that lock. Used to call it the Mongolian lock. But there it is, Fresno Bulldogs. Anybody from Fresno or anybody has any feedback, input, anything they would like to share regarding their experience with the Bulldogs, go ahead and leave a comment about it. Let's talk about it. If you find any contradictions or anything where I'm wrong at, please correct me. I only go by what I've heard, what I've been told, and what I've seen with my own eyes. Whether it's a complete history or understanding, I don't know because I'm not from Fresno, but I could just give it to you how I was told and how I experienced it. If you have anything related to this, go ahead, leave a comment. Hit the like button, share it, get it out there. Prison Break Raw, uncut, uncensored, no holds barred, not sugarcoated, not politically correct, all up in your face, slapping you with that dick reality. And I'm out. And she's asleep. I'm gone.